On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, have we lost the Red Sea? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So there's a lot of discussion about what is happening and transpiring in and around the Red Sea. The U.S. Navy, along with other navies, have been shooting down drones, missiles, cruise, ballistic, you name it, for quite a while and being very successful about it. The number of ships that have been hit, more importantly, the number of ships sunk, only one, the Ruby Mar, and the number of merchant mariners killed, just 3 on board True Confidence. If the goal of the navies of the world is to open up the Red Sea for trade, they are not being successful. As a matter of fact, what we have seen is a 50% reduction in the amount of ships going through, which raises the question, who's winning this in the Red Sea? Is it the Houthi, or is it the navies of the U.S., Great Britain, and its allies in Operation Prosperity Guardian? That means, why are we still fighting if we are losing this war? We're going to look at those questions and more in this video. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come in. So this chart shows you what is taking place because of the attacks in and around of Yemen through the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Bab el Mandeb. Shipping has been diverted from that traditional route between Europe, Asia, Asia to Europe. They are now going around Africa, the southern end of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. We're seeing almost a 50% reduction in the number of ships that are cycling through this area. And the vast majority of these ships are large, valuable cargo vessels, container ships, LNG tankers. We're going to break down those numbers a little bit more here. Started on December 15th when Maersk Lines and Hapag announced they were diverting. They have been joined by almost all the other major shipping firms from around the world. If you want a good timeline of the event, USNI, the U.S. Naval Institute, has been keeping this timeline up to date. I'll have the link in the show notes. They're basically taking the statements from the U.S. Central Command and other information and compiling it together. But the key thing to note is that we're seeing a reduction in presence of forces in and around the region. The Dwight Eisenhower Carrier Battle Group, along with the destroyers associated with them, are staying in the area. We had an appearance of European Union vessels, Operation Aspids, but what we're seeing is a reduction in there. We're seeing some ships replaced. We're seeing some ships not being returned. We're also seeing some issues with the readiness of some vessels in and around the area. Now, at the same time, the Iranians are also seeing a reduction. The Bashad, which has been the vessel that has been spying on vessels moving in and around this area, has returned back to Iran, may indicate a lessening of action in and around this area, but it could also be measured with the fact that there are fewer vessels of sufficient target for the Houthi. Let's remember, the whole reason for this conflict goes back to the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. Now, I know there's a long history before October 7th. I'm not going to go into that history because that would be a whole separate video on itself. There's plenty of them out there on YouTube. But when Hamas attacked Israel, Israel in turn has countered. And it's that Israeli counterattack that has led the Houthi to attack shipping. Initially, they targeted Israeli ships, either flagged or owned. That led to Israeli ships diverting. But then they started targeting ships supporting the U.S., Great Britain, or had some indirect connection to Israel. And they have also attacked ships that have nothing to do with any of that because of the difficult nature of identifying vessels. Ships are very hard to identify exactly who they're owned by. But this leads to some big questions, because if the goal here is to stop the Houthi attacks, there are some elements that are still going on. For example, one of the things that has not taken place is the fact that there are still crews being held by both Yemen, by Iran, and until very recently by Somalia. We just saw the release of the Abdullah after the owners paid $5 million. But the crew of Galaxy Leader are still being held. Add to it, we've seen some recent attacks by Iran against shipping. They now hold a fleet of vessels. The most recent vessel taken was the MSC Ares. This is a ship of Mediterranean Shipping Company, but is owned by an Israeli owner. They have also taken some other vessels. The St. Nicholas, which had to, which used to be a vessel called the Suez Rajan, that was diverted by the United States to offload Iranian oil, and the Niobe and the Advantage Suite, vessels vessels that Iran has targeted for issues which don't really have a lot of validity. It has more to do with wanting to grab ships. So we're seeing mariners being held hostage. And one of the things that we have seen is the shipping industry now has come out pleading to the United Nations, to the International Maritime Organization, to do something to protect maritime security and seafarers. You even have the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, Arnesio Dominguez, coming out and addressing the 111th session of the Legal Committee with his appeal about this, highlighting specifically the Galaxy Leader and the MSC Aries. You even have Chief McCoy, one of the biggest YouTubers concerning shipping, doing a video about merchant ships in the war zone. So the danger in and around this region is well known. The U.S. Maritime Administration has just recently updated its advisory for the area. It's covering the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb Strait, the Gulf of Aden, Indian Ocean, Somalia Basin, Arabian Sea, Gulf of Oman, Straits of Hormuz, and the Persian Gulf. This is a massive area of issue, and what they're talking about here is that regional conflict, military activity, terrorist attacks, and piracy pose significant threats to commercial shipping in and around this area. The U.S. government is continually assessing the area, but they cannot assure protection. Again, this raises a lot of concerns, because if the U.S. Maritime Administration is raising this threat, this area is not safe for U.S. shipping, as we'll show here in a minute. So if you look at the impact of the trade disruptions being done by the Houthi, this is the IMF Portwatch, about 15% of shipping goes in and through this area of global trade, about 22,000 transits annually. And if you look at the data, this is the Suez Canal transits. Notice that right here in December, right around December 18th, right around that period of time, this is where we see the reduction. So that when we come here to the most recent figures for 17 April, whereas last year the average number of ships going through was 78, this year they're down to 37. So you have almost a 50% reduction. If you look at the volume of trade over 6 months, you can see a similar change. Here we see it kind of as per the normal, but now all of a sudden we're going down from 5.3 million tons per day going through down to 2 million tons. And if you look at the Bab el Mandeb, you can see those data reflected. The amount of trade going through here from 76 ships down to 27. Where are they going? It's the Cape of Good Hope. You can see the jump here in the Cape of Good Hope from 48 ships to 88 ships. If you look at the transits here, you're looking at roughly 45% of all ships are diverting around the area. Over 80% of car carriers, over 60% of container ships are diverting. And the reason for that is very easy. Higher value. Higher value ships pay more in their war risk. At a 1% war risk insurance, if your vessel is only worth $10 million cargo and ship versus a ship that's $100 million or $250 million or $500 million, it is more economical to sail around Africa, incur an extra $1 million in fuel charges, offset it by not having to pay $500,000 in a Suez Canal transit, and most importantly, you're not paying a war risk payment. You can see even crude tankers are down 20%, dry bulk 40%, LNG carriers over 90%, LPG carriers under 50%, and product tankers a little over 40%. This is a massive reduction in terms of vessels. Now, fortunately, some of these ships are readily available. So if you're a container carrier, for example, you're not that concerned with this because you have excess capacity. If you're a car carrier, if you're an LNG, LPG carrier, if you are a crude oil or product tanker, there's not that many of them out there. And when you go these longer distances, that means you either have to sail faster, which you can't do now because of emissions restrictions and taxes associated with it, or you have to put more ships on the route. Fortunately, there's more container ships because the container companies are flush with cash and they've been building container ships over the past 3 years. Nobody's building tankers right now. So if you have a ship that can do 6 runs a year between Europe and Asia, for example, but now you got to divert around Africa, well, now maybe you're only doing 5 runs. And if you don't have more ships to put on that service, like the container liners do, that fortunately they have them, tankers don't. That means the cost, the ton-mile cost goes up. This is the European Union's European NAVFOR. This is the Aspidus report showing you vessels starting with Galaxy Leader back in 19 November. And you can just see the scope and scale of attacks. They have over 140 attacks as of 13 April. And while attacks are slowing down, it's not exactly clear if this is due to the degradation of the Houthis' ability to attack or because there's a lot less vessels of target note for the Houthi to attack. This is the Washington Institute site that has tracked all vessel attacks since 2019 in and around the area. You'll notice attacks in and around the Straits of Hormuz, here, the Persian Gulf, out into the Gulf of Oman and into the northern Arabian Sea. This is of great concern because there is no diversion out of the Persian Gulf. There is nowhere to go around. If you can't get through the Persian Gulf, then you are not able to get out into this region. But the biggest slew of attacks we've seen is right here on the southern Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb, the Gulf of Aden, out into the Arabian Sea. This area of attack is of particular note. Now, one of the interesting reports is this one done by Lloyd's List. This is Bridget Dyken, who's their quantitative analysis person. And she noticed this on 17 April. No evidence more Chinese or Russian ships are transiting the Bab el Mandeb, meaning that we're not seeing a peak in these vessels. We're not seeing more vessels come through. However, when you look at ships coming through, and I am just pulling this up to take a look at this, I want to just show you the vessels that are sailing off Yemen right now. This is marine traffic. This is the automated identification system that is used to identify. So the ships will identify where they're going to with their destination. And in destination, they can type anything you want. Notice right here, the Highland, Liberian flag, vessel no contact Israel. Same thing here with the AC Youth. And I'm just going to go down here and just kind of ding on some ships. I want to show you. So here you see some of the destinations being typed in here. Here's a vessel, China, no call Israel. All Chinese crew. China owned, new delivery. All Chinese. Going down here, we just want to look at some more of these vessels. And again, I had looked at these armed guard on board, China crew and owns, armed guard on board, Syrian crew, Egypt, Suez, Chinese crew, armed guards on board, listing China, Chinese owner and crew, guard on board, all Chinese. Going over here, heading to Suez. This is, what does it say? All Syrian crew on board. We're seeing a lot more of all Syrian crews on board. That's one that's really standing out right there. Armed guards on board. This just gives you the idea of something that we've been seeing happen. There may not be any more Russian and Chinese ships sailing through the area, but the U.S. Navy, the British Navy, all the nations taking part in Operation Prosperity Guardian is supposed to be protecting vessels transiting the area. But if Western vessels have left the area, why are they still there? Because all those vessels are identifying as Chinese. And understand, the Chinese have a squadron of vessels right down here in Djibouti. They're right down in this region down here. They're based out of here. It's the 45th Escort Squadron. They are not doing anything so far in terms of escorting vessels. We don't see them really doing much. They're not shooting down Houthi missiles. So the U.S., British, and other navies are really guarding ships that are not, notice nowhere in here, by the way, are U.S. vessels. So back on January 9th, there was a large effort to run vessels through this region, including 4 American flag vessels: the Alliance Norfolk, the Green Bay, the Liberty Glory, and the Maersk Atlanta. And those vessels came under attack, but the ships were successfully run through. But on January 24th, 2 U.S. flag vessels, these are ships that are part of what's called the Maritime Security Program. This is a 60-ship fleet where the U.S. government provides a stipend of about $6 million to the owner-operator to have the ship under the U.S. registry. This is to provide U.S. vessels to carry not just commercial goods, but also military cargo, but more importantly, to have a framework of a U.S. merchant marine, to have vessels, crew, the infrastructure for it. And on January 24th, 2 vessels, Maersk Chesapeake and Maersk Detroit, were heading through the area when the ships were engaged. USS Gravely, one of the destroyers, was in the area, and they were able to intercept it, but both Maersk Detroit and Maersk Chesapeake were unable to head through the strait. They actually turned back around from their position here in the Bab el Mandeb. They were actually coming through the Gulf of Aden into the Bab el Mandeb. They were going to run up the Red Sea, but instead they had to turn around, head back out, and actually leave the area. Then you have this event that happened. This is the Liberty Power. This is a large roll-on, roll-off ship recently acquired by Liberty Marine. The vessel was sailing from the United States into the Mediterranean, down into the Red Sea. And on January 18th, the vessel turned around. Now, the vessel had turned off its AIS for a brief period of time, but when it rematerialized later on here, right on around the 27th, it was heading northbound out and heading back through the Suez Canal. This vessel then sailed entirely around Africa, came back up into the Persian Gulf to Kuwait, and then sailed back around again and is now heading back to the United States. Understand, this means that the Houthi not only are diverting vessels, but they're turning around U.S. flag vessels. Now, if the U.S. Navy's goal is to open up the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden, they are not being successful in that. While they're, and let me be clear, I am not degrading the performance of the U.S. crews and the destroyers by any means. That's not what I'm doing. But the goal here is to open up trade. We are not opening up trade, which raises the question is, what is the strategic and operational goals here of this conflict? If strategically it's to resume trade, then shooting down missiles is not going to do it by itself. As long as the threat exists, then the ocean carriers are going to they're not going to take the chance. They're risk adverse. They're going to head around. And I think this is a major problem that we're seeing happening. Then you have this ship. This is the Maersk Yorktown. Now, Maersk Yorktown is a smaller kind of feeder vessel that is operating in the region. On April 9th, the vessel was sailing from Salah in Oman down to Djibouti when this report came in from the Central Command that approximately 3 a.m. on April 9th, USS Mason successfully engaged and destroyed one inbound anti-ship ballistic missile launched by Iranian-backed Houthi terrorists. The ASBM was likely targeting the motor vessel. It says Yorktown, should be the Maersk Yorktown. A U.S. flag, U.S.-owned vessel being escorted by Laboon and Mason. There was no injuries or damage. That is significant, that report, because up until now, U.S. destroyers did not do escorting of individual vessels. They basically set themselves up as gatekeepers between the main shipping lines and where the vessels are going. So does this represent a change in the rules of engagement and operational plans of the U.S. forces in and around the area? Are we going to see U.S. ships escorting merchant ships through the region? They hadn't done that largely because there's not enough vessels in and around the area. This chart was done by Ian Ellis, and one of the things he shows is what forces are in and around the area. The Ike Strike Group, which is one of the major ones here, only has 2 destroyers with it, Gravely and Mason. Philippine Sea, the cruiser, really has to escort it. There's a couple of other forces. There's Laboon that's in and around the area. Indianapolis and LCS, really not sufficient for that. It's really up in the Persian Gulf area. Florida is a guided missile ballistic submarine and some replenishment vessels. We really lack the escort vessels that we need. This is what you need frigates for. And unfortunately, we're not getting the Constellation until 2029, 2030. And so is the U.S. changing it? If that is the plan, then why are we not allowing U.S. ships to be free-flowing through here? There was an attack just this morning on a vessel. Not sure if it's going to be Maersk Yorktown again, whether or not there are escorts providing this. But I think it's significant, the fact that the U.S. Navy is providing this escort, and the ships, as you saw just before, going through this region, are identifying themselves as Chinese crew, Syrian crew, Russian cargo. There's not ships heading between Europe and Asia with what is the kind of the main supply lines. Those ships are heading around Africa. And even U.S. flagged ships like the Liberty Power, are being forced to go. I don't know what the cargo was on Liberty Power, but it went into a series of ports along the U.S. where a lot of military cargo is loaded, and then had to sail to the port of Kuwait, up to Kuwait, a port in Kuwait, Ashabaya, to offload. If that was a military cargo on board Liberty Power and it got diverted, what does this say about our ability to defend our ships heading through this region? And if the Houthis have closed the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden, then do we still need our forces in and around the area? Which goes us back to the question, have we lost the Red Sea? Because it appears we have. Understand, there are some things we can do to offset this. If you want U.S. protection, we can do what we did back in 1987 to 88, reflag vessels into the U.S. registry, and let's let the U.S. Navy escort them through the channels. Stop protecting all merchant ships and just protecting U.S. ships. Now, you can make the argument, well, Sal, trade is carried on every ship. It's not just on U.S. flag ships. Exactly right. But most of that trade is already diverting around Africa. We looked at the stats. Nearly half the ships, half the cargo is going around Africa. And then this is where you get UN, NATO, whatever groups you want to get in here together, and you can form convoys running through. I think the plan that we have in operation right now is not achieving the success we want. If you are U.S. flag, we can also do things to defer the war risk insurance. The U.S. government, for example, can underwrite part of the war risk insurance. We're not going to do that for a Liberian, Panama, or Marshall Island registered vessel. That is the big difference. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next video, Sal, signing off.